Touchdown! Unbelievable! Central Michigan does it!
Yes, we are back for another week of Let's Talk College Football. Nothing but college football, ladies and gentlemen, on this show. And thanks to all those who watched last week's show, our pilot. And coming up later in the show, we will review my 5 picks for the week. Yeah, that's going to be fun. Man, I talk about picks from last week. Why do I keep coughing? Well, there's probably a good reason for that. You'll find out later in the show. And also my national segment called The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. Okay? And we're going to begin our show, though, talking about thumbs up, thumbs down, thumbs off in terms of the Big 12. Yeah, this past week, thumbs down, plenty of them. Going to begin with Texas Tech's defense. You know, one day they're going to play great D. Of course, I'm going to be dead of old age by the time that happens. We keep thinking that if they're going to get better on defense, instead they seem to get worse. And they gave up 68 points to Arizona State in the desert late Saturday night / Sunday morning. You should be able to win when you score 55 points. By the way, if it sounds like a broken record, well, of course, maybe it is. Because last year, Tech lost a couple of games despite scoring at least 50 points. Some things never change. To T.C.U. They played behind most of the game against Arkansas, but got, I think, like a 22-0 run, led by 8 points late, and let Arkansas drive down the length of the field to score a touchdown and then get a 2-point conversion to tie. T.C.U. then missed a game-winning field goal in regulation. And in overtime and double OT, Arkansas put the game away. And T.C.U., yeah, they didn't look great last week, but did get by South Dakota State, but not this time, losing at home to the Razorbacks. Ouch. Ouch. More bad news for the Big 12. Iowa State gets clobbered by Iowa. I know Iowa State was expected to lose, but they've been competitive with the Hawkeyes lately. Well, not this year. This was decided pretty early. And so much for the Kansas Jayhawks building upon momentum. They were favored to beat the Ohio Bobcats last week and then proceeded to lose at home. So, Rock Chalk Jayhawk, yeah, they take one to the chin. And forget about the fact that Oklahoma State got jobbed in their ball game against Central Michigan. Forget about the fact that Central Michigan got a Hail Mary to win on the final play of the game. Forget about all that, okay? Prior to all that, Oklahoma State still did not play a good game, okay? Offensively, they're still having struggles finding a consistent ground game. And defensively, they gave up too many long drives for touchdowns and some pivotal third downs, as you can see right there. For Oklahoma State to play on that upper level, you can't let teams like Central Michigan hang around. And, of course, I'm not done talking about the Cowboy game against Central Michigan. I'll highlight it again on Good, Bad, and the Ugly later in the show. That is my thumbs down for the Big 12. Thumbs off now, where I don't go thumbs up or thumbs down. That's the Sooners, the Longhorns, the Bears, and the Mountaineers, all expected to win by double digits this past week. Mission accomplished, so I can't really go thumbs up or thumbs down because they did what they were supposed to do. Thumbs up this week for the Big 12? Not going to give any at all. Not one. The conference went 4-5 this week, and if they want to be taken serious in terms of the college football playoff, yeah, matchups this past week in which you lost more than you won is not going to help the image of the league whatsoever. Now, let's talk about the good, the bad, and the ugly. We'll begin with the good. Remember Tennessee, how pathetic they looked against Appalachian State in the opener? Well, they had a bad start against Virginia Tech, but took advantage of early turnovers. And once the balls got the momentum, they didn't look back. They won impressively, and Josh Dobbs bounced back for him, accounting for 5 touchdowns. Also, Mike Tyson was big this past weekend. And no, I'm not talking about the boxer. I'm talking about the Cincinnati defender. 3 interceptions. He was big, and the Bearcats won over Purdue. And, by the way, Lamar Jackson. Better take this guy seriously for the Heisman, even though it's mid-September. Over 600 yards and, by the way, 5 touchdowns, including this highlight reel. Of course, Louisville will have a huge game coming up Saturday against Florida State. Now for the bad. I guess Georgia and Clemson are saving their strength for later on in the season because they barely got by, I consider, inferior competition. I mean, Georgia playing Nichols and just barely getting past Nicholls State. You kidding me? 26-24. It is a win, but the Bulldogs, they know they got to pick it up. And so does Clemson. I mean, a team that almost won the national title last year, number 2 this season, and now they just got passed by Florida State in the latest polls. Now Florida State's number 2. And Clemson deserves to drop, at least a notch after barely getting past Troy by 6 points. And holy hell, 9 turnovers between B.Y.U. and Utah in the Holy War. That's right, 9 turnovers in the first 3 quarters. Utah, despite committing 6 of them, still won the game, but a game that was not very pretty for the human eyes. And the ultimate in ugly, maybe the ugly of the year. The Mid-American Conference officials on the field, as well as the Big 12 officials from the replay booth at last Saturday's Central Michigan Oklahoma State game. The play you just saw should have been the end of the game. Mason Rudolph throwing it out of bounds. Intentional grounding, a penalty, but the game is over when the time is run out and you have a loss of down, which intentional grounding results in. Game should have been over, but instead Central Michigan gets an untimed down, and the unthinkable happens. The Hail Mary, the lateral, and Central Michigan scores a touchdown, wins the game, and Oklahoma State fans are stunned. Well, those officials have been suspended for 2 games. And a lesson to us all that in football, it's not over even when it should be over, by rule. And a couple more uglies to talk about. The Kentucky Wildcats, getting embarrassed, by Florida, losing 45-7. I remember the week before blew a big lead against Southern Miss. So Kentucky off to a very slow start. And, you'd expect progression with Mark Stoops as head coach. Bob's brother. Hasn't happened. And if you're curious, if Kentucky's going to fire Mark at the end of the season, they're going to have to pay out $12 million to do so. I'm not sure if they're willing to pay that big of a price to get rid of him and bring somebody else into the forefront. And then another ugly, Northwestern. This is a team I expected more from. And so far against non-Power 5 competition, Western Michigan and Illinois State losing both games. And offensively, I knew that they were challenged, but I didn't know that they were non-existent. And so far, that's been the case for Coach Fitzgerald's team. They've been bad so far. And, of course, they haven't even gotten to the Big Ten play yet. So the worst might be yet to come for the Wildcats. Now, let's go ahead and talk about my 5 picks, and we'll go ahead and go over last week's picks, and won a couple, okay? Thanks in part, of course, to Iowa for shellacking Iowa State. Said that would happen. And my other one that I won was because I thought that both offenses would do well in the game. So I want to thank Texas Tech and Arizona State's defense for playing like junk and helping me out, because the over-under in the game, the total, was around 79.5, and my gosh, I think they passed that maybe by halftime of the third quarter. I had that one easily, one of the easiest locks I've had of the year. In fact, the teams combined for 123 points, with Arizona State scoring 68 of them. That's good news. Bad news is that I thought UTEP would be able to put more than 7 points on the board against Texas. Took the Longhorns a while to get going, but they ended up covering that 4-touchdown spread, so I was a loser on that one. I was also a loser on Arkansas and T.C.U. Oh, my goodness. T.C.U. took them forever to get going, and then once they got past that 7.5-point spread margin, once they took it to 8, I thought, okay, hold on, Horned Frog defense for 3 minutes, and I'll get a great backdoor cover. But, of course, Arkansas scored a touchdown, got a 2-point conversion, as you saw at the beginning of the video, and just to add salt to the wound, won the game. So thanks, TCU, for nothing. And Virginia Tech, Tennessee, I felt so good about this game in the second quarter when, Bach Tech, an 11-point underdog, and I took the points, was at 14-0. So I really, at one point, had a 25-point spread in my favor, and Virginia Tech couldn't hold on to the ball to save their skin. Tennessee would start scoring points, start getting momentum. Once they had the momentum, it was game volunteers, and then they would eventually, in the second half, get that spread covered easily. So I was a loser on that one too for taking the underdog in Bach Tech. So there you have it, going 2-3 in week number 1. We're going to bounce back this week, I'm hoping, and we got 5 more matchups to talk about, okay? And you know what? If it worked for me last week, it's going to work for me again. We're going to have Louisiana Tech and Texas Tech, where the total is 80. And you know where I'm going in this one, the over. A lot of points to be scored by both teams in this one. Pat Mahomes is one of the best quarterbacks in the country, plays for the Red Raiders, and Tech's defense, they're guaranteed to give up a lot of points because that's what they do best. So I'm sure Tech will win, but again, I'm more intrigued by the over, which is 80, between the Bulldogs and the Red Raiders. Game number 2, Pittsburgh at Oklahoma State. This is a game where I think Oklahoma State's ticked after what happened last week, the controversial loss, but also to the way that they played. They know they didn't play their best. Pittsburgh at home last week, coming off a win, interstate pride against Penn State, and Pitt looked good doing it. Now they got to go on the road playing an angry team from Stillwater. The trend in this case says Oklahoma State to cover, so I'm going to say Oklahoma State minus the 6.5. Michigan State, Notre Dame. The one thing we know about Mark Antonio teams is the fact that they play dang good defense on the road or at home. I don't know if they're going to win this game, but 7.5 looks very inviting for me. I think that the Michigan State defense will at least give their team a chance to win, so give me Michigan State plus the 7.5. You have Florida Atlantic at Kansas State. Remember, the Wildcats did not play last week, so they've been pretty hungry to play for a couple of weeks. And week number 1, even though they lost to Stanford, were very competitive on the road against Christian McCaffrey and the Cardinal. So I think Kansas State, with that defense, I think is one of the most improved in the Big 12, maybe the most improved, and definitely going to be one of the most experienced. I think the defense will do the job against FAU. I think playing at home, the offense should score more than enough points to cover that 22.5. So I'll take the Wildcats minus the 22.5. And my final pick is Georgia at Missouri. Missouri's just flat out bad, okay? These aren't the Missouri Tigers of a few years ago that was one game away from getting to the national championship, and of course got beat by Auburn, who played for the national title that year against Jameis Winston and Florida State. Missouri hasn't been quite that good since. Last year, fell on hard times, had a losing record, and this year, every indication that it's going to happen. And Georgia wants to prove that last week against Nicholls was a fluke, as the Bulldogs barely got by Nicholls State. I think they go to Columbia, Missouri. I think they make a statement, and they let Nick Chubb just chub on down and score touchdowns. I think Georgia will easily cover the -6 against Missouri. So that's my look at college football on Let's Talk College Football. Don't forget, my weekly matchup show will take place. It's looking like Wednesday, Thursday at the latest, between the Sooners and the Buckeyes, one of the most anticipated showdowns of the season in college football. And for Oklahoma, as far as historic names, the biggest game that they've had at home, since 2012 when Notre Dame came to Norman. So we will talk about the Sooners and Buckeyes coming up real soon on this very particular channel. So check back with us, and thanks for joining us for Let's Talk College Football.